The Findhorn Foundation in the north of Scotland is a center of spiritual service in co-creation with nature, which emphasizes education and community. The Findhorn Foundation is at the heart of one of the best-known intentional communities in the world, and is a major international center of adult educational, personal, and spiritual transformation. About 14,000 visitors a year come to the foundation in one of the many ways that it is possible to visit, live, and work there. Eckhart Tolle gave a weekend retreat in the Universal Hall to a group of over 300 people. This is a record of that event. Welcome to our weekend retreat. At this beautiful sacred place. Our theme for this weekend is stillness. Which is inseparable from who you are in the depth of your being. One could say everybody is still already. The stillness is already there. It does not need to be found, even. Certainly it does not need to be created. Because it's already there. The only thing is, you may not notice it. If there's a lot of mental noise, then you just don't notice it, that it's there. And also you don't notice a dimension within yourself that is far deeper than the movement of thought.
And your whole identity is then bound up with the movement of thought. A mind-created sense of self. A personal history and no more. That is soon coming to an end. Soon, next year or in 40, 50 years' time, it's soon. So who you are and stillness are one and the same. And if you have not yet gone completely mad in this mad world, that means you have some access to the stillness inside you. You may not remember it afterwards because it's not memorable, since stillness is timeless and the mind cannot memorize it or think, oh, that was interesting, I'll remember that, because stillness is not interesting. Interesting is a mental thing. Just as our weekend here is not going to be interesting. You may have noticed that already. But interesting is not the ultimate. It's only the ultimate to the human mind. You can go out here and look at a tree or a flower or the sunset, and could you say, this sunset is interesting? Only if you were trying to write a PhD about sunsets. If you had to analyze it, or the oak tree becomes interesting the moment you start to analyze it mentally. And there is a place for that also in this dimension. But if you get caught up on that dimension only, where you break things up into little bits and pieces and analyze them, and by the way, most kinds of analysis, you have to kill the thing first before you can analyze it, or in the process of analysis it gets killed. But if you just be with the oak tree, contemplate it, truly look, then what you're looking at goes beyond interesting, is far deeper than interesting. The same as the sunset. There's nothing interesting about it, and yet it is awe-inspiring. It is deep. There's a depth there that defies analysis by the mind. At the moment you analyze it, you have reduced it to something lifeless. And most people in our civilization, and this has been going on for a long time, are trapped in that dimension where compulsively they go about their life analyzing, interpreting, and labeling things as soon as they enter their field of consciousness. They do it to people, they do it to situations that they encounter, immediately have some personal reactive relationship to it. They do it to nature, and they can no longer perceive the sacredness that is there in nature, because they approach it only through thinking. And that is a dreadful prison that you then end up in, the prison of your own mind. And then you approach your whole life only through that. And your whole life becomes reduced to a conceptual reality in the head, consisting of thoughts that you have about things, viewpoints, opinions, and even so-called knowledge. Knowledge is thought, a label, and gives the illusion that you know. And all it is, it's a thought that you have put on something. And then it loses its depth and aliveness. And you begin to relate to reality through the veil of thinking. And you relate to yourself through the veil of thinking, because you yourself become a conceptual, thought-based entity, an egoic self, a me, with its unfulfilled personal history, its desires and fears and frustrations and its hopes that it will find ultimate fulfillment of its unfulfilled and unfulfilling sense of self based on a story in the future, which again is the thought form. That's what the future is. Nobody has ever encountered it except as a thought. And yet most people live unconsciously as if the next moment or the one after that were more important than this moment, the only thing there ever is. This one moment that you could never escape from, have never escaped from, will never escape from, that is inseparable from the life that you are, also inseparable from stillness, because the moment you enter the now with your attention, a stillness arises. The essence of the present moment, no matter how mad it may appear on the surface, is always stillness. It is also sacredness. The only place where the sacred dimension can be found is now. You have to be present to this moment. You have to wake up into this moment to realize that life is sacred. When you are lost in thought, sacred is meaningless. It could become another of the many concepts that you can play with. And you could write a PhD about it without ever having encountered it yourself. So this, the depth of now, is inseparable from your very being, your very life, and it is the sacred one life. And yes, this is why we're here, to deepen our awareness of that dimension. And the sacred is everywhere. If you become truly present, you would find the sacredness everywhere. It's easier here in certain places that are called sacred, there is less of a density in the structures, the physical structures, the forms. There is a transparency almost to the forms. Something shines through the forms. And this is why we call those places sacred. But even here, there are some people who cannot sense that because they are not present enough when they walk in the garden. They are still in their head thinking about where they are going the day after tomorrow and the accumulation of problems which are thought forms that are part of their sense of self. I have important problems to think about. And occasionally you get a glimpse, 3 seconds of presence, and you get a glimpse, oh, and immediately there comes the movement of thought again. So some people cannot be present here. Most of you can, and those who cannot, I believe, will quickly deepen and see how easy it is to be present and how hard it is not to be present. Normally people tell me the opposite. They say it's so hard to be present. And this is what the mind believes. But the opposite is true. Not being present to the now is hard. To live trapped in your mind is hard. That makes living into something that is a struggle and an effort. And you never get there. You never make it because you live for the future, which is only a thought form. And this is another aspect of living trapped in thought, with your whole sense of self trapped in thought, hoping that at some point you will find yourself, complete yourself, or it's all going to work out in the end. And in the way the mind imagines it, it cannot work out, because every form dies, and every structure eventually dissolves again. And the mind only thinks in terms of forms and structures, and it hopes that life will work itself out on that level of structures and forms. And it's always disappointed because it cannot. And the miracle is, it's already working out at this very moment. It's already as it should be at this moment. You have already arrived at the place of sacredness at this moment. It's easier to see it here, to sense that here. More difficult to feel that this moment is sacred when you find yourself at Piccadilly Circus or Times Square. And you need to be an enlightened being, perhaps, which simply means very present, to see the sacredness in the flashing Coca-Cola sign at Piccadilly Circus. And you need to be a Buddha to see the sacredness in a prison camp. And if one says the prison camp also has the dimension of the sacred, if one says that prematurely, this will be misunderstood and really will not make sense unless you know within yourself that that which is beyond form, the one formless life, is indestructible. And some people who were in prison camps realized it for themselves. So we are here to find that dimension that is deeper than thought within ourselves, that has nothing to do with time. And so people ask sometimes, how do I still my mind? I want to find the stillness. And then, yes, there are some good meditation methods. And eventually that also has to be left behind, otherwise it comes in between who you are. You put a method there to find yourself. That is a space between you and yourself. And every method eventually needs to be left behind. You don't need it, it's the last thing you leave behind. And this particular teaching works without methods. But if you have a method, it's beautiful, and you use it until you don't need it anymore.